Welcome to Lead Clinic. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Vitale. Today, we're joined with Jay Reever from LeadSwami. Welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so, Jay, for those of our viewers who don't know exactly what you do, could you give us a brief overview of your services and that you provide to insurance agents?
Yeah, definitely. So we've been in existence for about 2 years now. We've worked with almost 100 agents now, specializing in optimizing their marketing spend to help them improve their rate of return and just basically overhauling their processes in their office to maximize the efforts in doing that.
And so we're both former insurance agents as well. Mm-hmm. And, the one thing that I always say about insurance agents, and I say this lovingly as one, is they're very good salespeople, and oftentimes they're very good salespeople, but not really the ideal business person of measuring return on investment of marketing dollars. Some agents I'll hear will spend $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a month and really have no idea what sources are working or what's optimizing. And so what do you do when you come in and you see an agency like that? What's your process to really refine the data and help them make better data-driven decisions?
Yeah, so it's multi-step process, right? We just don't come in and say, hey, this is working, this isn't working. We really have to monitor it over time, right? It's just not a switch. And so what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll organize their data. And that's basically all we're doing is we're taking the data that we're getting from the lead vendors, and we're matching that up with their CRM systems that they hopefully are working in. Just one of them, hopefully not two. And then a lot of them use a sales platform to record their sales. And so we're just marrying all that data together. So that takes a little bit to get done. And then we need to work on the processes to make sure that the agents that are taking the phone calls are one, answering the phone calls, but two, assigning it to themselves in their CRM and dispositioning it correctly. And once all that happens, then we're able to tell the exact campaign that is actually coming in and that their producers are talking to and hopefully converting. And so it's really about tracking the campaigns, figuring out what's working, and then just moving money in between those campaigns. And then hopefully finding more campaigns and publishers and vendors like yourself that can help increase the volume. Right.
And so, it's as we're recording this, it's getting late in the year, right? And a lot of folks are going to be, trying to get to bonus or get to a certain status if they're an all-state agency. And, as we go through that, what's the best advice you can give folks who are really, trying to maximize the next 30 days-ish or, even maximizing the last, let's just say, quarter of the year? What's the best advice you have for them in doing that and optimizing their marketing dollars?
Yeah, well, you got to know what's working right now. And then once you know what's working, you just got to pour gasoline on it at that point, right? And I've had a lot of those conversations in the last month. But more importantly is, hey, how do we not get into this position next year as well? And that starts also, in this 30 days. So ramp up, but then commit to yourself to continue to do that in January, February, March. This is the worst time to try to be doing this because everybody else is doing it. And so the lead spend goes up and you want filtered leads and everyone else is paying for filtered leads. So it's it's a bad cycle that we get in. And so a lot of the times with the clients that I work with is just, we're working to avoid this situation the entire year. And it's funny, the conversations that I'm having now compared to some of the conversations I'm having with the people that have already put in the work, it's just I'm like, remember, it's supposed to be slow. Remember that? Yep. We want it to be slow in November and December. And so there's just two different situations going on out there right now.
And so a lot of the agents you work with, you're working with a lot of all-state agents today, obviously. A lot of the agents that you're working with really, would you say before you started working with them, they had a good idea of what vendors were performing well and what vendors weren't, or most had no idea?
Most have no idea what's going on. Now, they have a ballpark, and usually the rough math that they do is, hey, how much premium did I write and how much did I spend? And if that's around $4 to $5, I'm good to go. So, for every dollar that they spend, they're getting $4 to $5 back in premium. And that's my baseline too, especially with an Allstate agent, right? When they're getting variable comp, that is a realistic rate of return to me. I don't include the expenses in there or anything like that of employees, but I think at a $5 return rate, you're able to, in variable comp, you should be able to pay your commissions and the lead cost all together and break even.
And really, too, right? As I've talked to insurance agents, some of them are like, okay, well, what's a good acquisition cost? And I know that varies widely, state to state. Some states have, really high premium, right? But what would what's your general advice on, a nationwide average, cost per acquisition, cost per household sale?
Yeah, I definitely state specific. But, I think around $350 is probably a good starting point. My ultimate goal and what I usually have written out and kind of track to in my system is $250 cost per household, right? I call it cost per sale because we're selling that one lead. However many policies we get out of it, that's either sales or we need to work on multi-vehicle, homeowners and stuff like that. But that's really, I think $350 is a fair dollar amount, especially with variable comp right now.
And what advice do you give your clients on working with different lead vendors or how many lead vendors? I always tell my clients I don't want to be the only vendor they work with. Yeah. I'm competitive. I want competition, and I want to be at the high end of their return on marketing dollars. Yeah. But what's your general advice for folks on how many different lead vendors they should be using or stuff like that?
Different for all sizes, right? But if you're spending $500 to $7,500 a month, you're okay probably with one lead vendor, right? Because then you can explore different campaigns inside each lead vendor and get a good mix. But once you start getting above that dollar amount, I think once you have one good lead vendor down, then you need to bring on a second one. And then with that second one, you need to find the products and the verticals that are working for that lead vendor and then scale up from there, depending on how much volume each lead vendor can get you. But like after you get out above that 7,500, you should diversify, which isn't my favorite word in the lead universe, but at least two above 7,500. But if you're getting into the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 range, you need a host. You probably need 7 to 8 lead vendors. And so that becomes the issue, right? And that's where a lot of people find value in my services is I help organize that and stack rank them for them.
And how do you find the performance of vendors over time? Fairly consistent, fairly inconsistent?
I would say inconsistent, right? And that's why it's good to have multiple different vendors. I was just on the phone with one today, with a client today, and one vendor was underperforming, and so we just switched money into a vendor that it was working, right? We didn't shut that vendor off, but we just said, hey, look, out of these campaigns that aren't performing where we want them to perform, we're going to cut off that marketing dollar and move it over to the other vendor.
One of the things that at Lead Clinic we do differently, right, is we identify publisher source and subsource to our clients. And most of our competition, I don't think any of them actually do, but most certainly do not. And we like to measure that because, we want to give our clients more of what's working for them. And I think that, as we review those data points with you, we see that some campaigns work really well nationwide, and some campaigns that work really well nationwide don't work well in one particular state. And, I think that measuring performance is critical, and running this agency like, an actual business, like, return on marketing dollars is really important. But do you see that across different vendors with your different clients perform really differently in different states or even in the same state? Yeah.
So that's the most common question I get, right? Hey, what vendor should I use and what should I do? And what product should I buy? That's like the wrong question to ask. It's what everybody asks, but it is agency specific with inside the state, right? Now, I have my favorite vendors, and I have favorite publishers with you. I have favorite products with EverQuote and Smart Financial and all the other ones, right? Because I see those perform consistently across the country. But that doesn't mean that the agency right next door to you is going to perform the exact same way in one product and the other. Especially when we're looking at Lead Clinic publishers, it's it's unbelievable from state to state, just the publisher and the source specific, that we have just a wide range of close rates, return rates. And so really and truly, I mean, and we've really started to do some of that work where we're like, okay, this group of publishers and sources is performing better than the others. What do we do with these? How do you source them? And then how does the bidding go and stuff like that? But that's just the start. And then once you get enough data, then we can start getting into the weeds and saying, yeah, this one's performing better. Let's turn down this one. And that's what I tell everybody, if I was to build a lead company, and I would do it exactly the way that you're doing it now, just providing that transparency between the sources and being able to pick and choose what you want and not what they want to give us, right?
Exactly. And I think the message of transparency that I try and preach, right, is because I just felt like I was in the dark with LeadMine forever. And I feel that most of my competitors do that in some instances because it's difficult to change in a large enterprise, but in some instances because it's a more profitable approach for them to be able to shift whatever they want into the funnel at any given time. And that's why I would suggest that you see these ebbs and flows of quality from vendor to vendor. One thing that I've noticed is there's a lot of the big companies, right, are buying and selling to each other on a very consistent basis. Yep. So it becomes almost impossible to track just by figuring out what lead vendor you're working with. And that's why I think the data is inconsistent. But besides transparency, besides, relationships with lead vendors, I think is critical. I think it was critical any time that, when I was a big lead buyer, I think that my vendor relationship were important. Yeah. And you feel the same way, or how do you?
Definitely. I'll say this, we can't be reliant on them though either as agents, right? And when we got to have good relationships with them, but we have to hold them accountable, right? And show them and present to them the data that we're seeing inside the agency. And then to be good partners, we have to look at ourselves too, right? And so then we should be able to go back and be like, hey, are we making enough dials? Are we answering the phone enough? Are we talking on the phone long enough? And if all those are yes, 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 then we need to have a good relationship to be like, hey, look, this isn't working. And saying, this is what's working. Can you provide us something? Or is there a filter set that we can do that works with, that you have, right, as a lead provider, that would hopefully help the situation, right? And as long as you have that consistent communication with your lead vendor, and that's the important part, is having consistent communication with them, it usually doesn't go sideways for too long, right? We can catch it after 2 or 3 weeks, and I think that's a quick catch. And then we regroup and then, try to get it back in line with where it was supposed to be. But you got to have consistent communication. I mean, and some lead companies are better than others, right? Some have step monthly meetings. Some you never talk to a lead person. And if you talk to an account executive, you might know more than they do. Yeah. So, and that's the problem that I've found. So
that's a big problem. That's a big problem. I always try and hire folks that have an understanding of the insurance industry, from an agency's perspective, right? Most of the folks that, we have worked in an agency before. And I think that's helpful because they understand, right? They've dialed out on an internet lead before and they know what to expect. A lot of folks ask me, and I give them my honest advice, but I'm a little bit removed from this now. But what's a proper what call cadence are we recommending? How many touch points? I always come at this and I look at it from the consumer's perspective, and we want to be good stewards of customer data and not abuse it, not call them a million times on day one. But what's reasonable, and what do you suggest to your clients generally?
Well, I've come up with a hard and fast rule. If you're taking a lead, you should expect to dial on average 10 times on that lead. So if you're buying 20 leads a day, you need to be producing at least 200 outbound dials in your agency. And then for every dial or every lead that you buy on top of that, you need to add in 10. And I'm not saying you're going to call that lead 10 times in the first day. I want you to call that lead on average 10, or on an average lead, we want to dial it 10 times within the first 3 weeks, right? Now, that's the average that I see, and it's really correlated with the close or the quote percentage. And so that's why the reason that we look at it that way. The successful branches, the high-performing branches, that number's north of like 15.
Okay.
So for each lead that they get, they're dialing at least 15 times on it.
In the first 3 weeks?
In the first 3 weeks.
Okay. So that's not a 5 time a day, every day.
No.
Yeah.
And so if you break that down, it looks more like you're going to call it right when you get it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you should probably send an email. And if you can text, you should send a text. Mm-hmm. But then you should call that lead back in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then get it on a cadence of every 2 hours or 3 hours from there, all the way through day 7. Maybe go down to 4 hours after that, through day 21. Mm-hmm. We found, though, after 30 days, really even truly after 21 days, there's just not much happening.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the manpower and the staff to be dialing, it's much better to add a dial in the beginning than dial a 22-old lead. Yeah,
and I think part of today's issue is there's a lot of people buying age data out there, and so that really at day maybe 21, maybe at day 30 with some publishers are selling that as age data, and then you're getting a whole new group of people reaching out to that consumer. It really creates a bad consumer experience in my mind. There's been a lot of news around the Federal Communications Commission and their second notice and notice of proposed rulemaking about changes. And with requiring one-to-one consent, I think the age data problem goes away because you can no longer sell it as age data. So, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, and kind of what my thoughts on that whole thing is going to be. Lead cost is going to go up, but lead quality is also going to go up, we would anticipate. And we have some custom Google campaigns that we work with on some of our clients together, and we see leads, $20 leads, $30 leads, up to today $44 leads, right? And what's your position on that high price point? Because in my opinion, agents have been trained to go to the real, the southernmost point of lead price and think that's a bargain, right? And your philosophy and mine is different. I'm a quality buyer and everything, but you're a data guy and you've seen the data work. So tell us about it a little bit.
Yeah. So look, this is, I'll probably go on a rant here because this is kind of one of my favorite things to talk about right now. And it is us as agents, we've caused a lot of these problems, right? Yeah. And I used to point a lot of my frustration at lead providers, Quote Wizard, EverQuote, all the big house ones. But as I've gone up through this in the last 2 years and have done more and more and I've been around the industry a lot more, it's the publishers that are selling multiple aggregators that who also are probably selling to multiple aggregators. And so it starts at the top. And then we as agents have said, oh, no, we want more for cheaper, more for cheaper, more for cheaper. And so everybody up along in the food chain has said, okay, let's do more for cheaper, right? Yep. And so here we are. And so now we are happy to get a 2.5% close rate. If that, right? I mean, like 2.5 on an internet data lead right now is probably great. We've come to accustomed to get the price down low enough where a 1.5% close rate will turn a decent, rate of return for us. That's crazy. It takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of dials. So 1.5%, and so you got to buy 200 leads to get three sales. Yeah, that's from my calculation. It should be at least 2,000 dials, right? Yeah. And then you start talking about all these dials that are going out. And so it's just a crazy industry that we're in right now that we think that's acceptable. And so what we've seen, especially with some of those Google publishers right now is, and one of my guiding philosophies, and I'll back up there, is like, I don't want to talk about price. I want to talk about cost per sale. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, everything else will work out, okay? And so I would much rather, with these Google partners that we have that are doing these campaigns that are higher dollar amount, these are active intent customers that have gone in and said insurance quotes, and then they've appeared and their banner has appeared, and they click on that banner, and then they fill out that form. That's a highly intent customer. You can't get that Google click less than $12 or $15. Yeah. So how do you expect? What do you think we're buying at $6 and $5. We're not buying that.
No.
So if we go in it with the understanding that everybody has to make money in the food chain, right? So they're getting a click for, let's just call it $15. Well, not everybody that clicks fills out the form.
Yep.
So if they can at least get a $50 conversion or a 50% conversion rate, it takes them $30, right? And so they're not going to sell it to us for $6.
Yep.
They're not going to sell it to us for $30.
Yep.
They're going to sell it to us for like $45.
Yep.
Shocker, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's the price. But with those leads that are coming from that publisher, we're seeing on average I think it was like 7.17% close rate, all up.
And if we remove Texas from that, we're like north of 10.
Correct. Yeah, we're right at 10%, and a 10% close rate on any lead right now, because I track a lot of leads, and we track about $1.4 million a month going through. A 15 to 20% close rate is a quote to close rate is pretty standard, right? And so if we're closing 10% all up, holy smokes, right? And so that's why with all the FCC action, I think what we've seen and what we're living in today gets cleaned up. And yes, we might have to pay $45 for an internet data lead, but you know what? The acquisition cost, the cost per sale is the same. And you know what? You have to hire probably 3 less people to do the amount of dials on it.
And that's just what I was going to get into, and just was my next question, which is like, I think a lot of people, and this will be funny because if the client that I'm thinking of in my mind right now watches this, he'll know it's him. And
hopefully it's a mutual one. So
yeah, it is. And I happen to really like him, nice guy. But like one of the things he told me in my initial call was, Peter, it's a volume game. It's just a volume game. It's just a volume game. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? And my thoughts on volume game is, you do everything you just said, and you do this at a huge volume at a cheap price, but there's the people cost and also the morale cost of those people, right? And I don't think anyone's tracking that. And I don't think you track it today either, but buying a more expensive lead, needing less people, right? I always look at it this way. Are we looking at your Allstate metrics, or your Farmers, or your State Farm metrics, or your Progressive metrics, or are you looking at your P&L for your business?
Right.
And the people cost is expensive, right?
It is. Or we go overseas and hire telemarketers that I don't know, could be complying with the FCC, could not be. Like, we don't know what's going on over there, and so then you're left with that if you don't want to hire the people.
Yeah. So most of the agencies you work with, they're outbound calling their own. Most are using outside call centers. We're kind of split.
We're pretty split. There's a role for everything, right? Some offices don't want to manage, and that's one of those conversations that I have with a lot of my clients just right from the beginning is like, what do you want to do? Do you want to manage to 150 dials or 120 dials a day? Most people will say no, right? And then if you're saying no, and you're not that good in the lead management system, then I'm saying like, you should probably buy warm transfers.
What does that mean, not very good in the lead management system?
What that means to me is like some of our agents are in there, some of them are doing it this way, some of them are doing it that way. And if you're
inconsistent process within the agency.
For sure, definitely. And if there's one thing that is consistent with the top performers is they have consistent processes. That is exactly what they have, and that's what makes them successful. It's not the leads that they're buying. It's not how much money they're spending. It is they do the exact same thing on every single call, on every single lead. It happens in their agency, and they track it. And they manage to it, right? And so that's what I'm talking about with the CRMs. And so if you're not wanting to live and breathe in your CRM, right, then your staff's probably not wanting to live and breathe in their CRM. So you got to get comfortable with that. And then, but if you're not comfortable, then you need the easiest lead to track. And the easiest lead to me is the phone rings, you pick up and you do a quote. 60%, 70% of the time, right? Because not all warm transfers are quotes. That's where I start. And so I think I'm about even split now on warm transfers, to data quotes, right? So, and when I say a warm transfer, just a call coming into the office.
You're paying per call.
Paying per call.
Per call.
Yep.
And so you're about 50-50 split between those. Mm-hmm. How did the metrics tie out in a cost way? Pretty similar?
Cost per sale, you can't see a difference, right? And that's the thing. And that's what I try to get across to agents. Yes, you are paying maybe $60 for a warm transfer. But on your volume game, when you're buying a whole bunch of leads for $2, guess what? Your quote price is still the same.
Yep.
If not, maybe it could be lower, but your quote to close percentage is lower too, and so your cost per sale is the same. And so that's what I see a lot. I see. Well, excuse me. There are benefits to getting a home data lead as opposed to a home phone call.
Really?
That would be the one vertical that data leads are better than a warm transfer. Because right now on a warm transfer, there are so few of them inside the industry that they go for $100 to $150 a call.
So
and that
just
gets economically
it's
tough.
just because the cost is so high.
So high.
There's no real difference on consumer intent or anything?
Yeah, no.
Okay, so it's just the price.
It's just the price, and that's just supply and demand.
Supply and demand issue.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I know when we first started working together really closely, we were big into home data leads, or at least that was your position. I came around to it and we saw the numbers. I think we've seen it kind of level off between home and auto in recent months, right?
Yep, we have. That could be Texas though too.
That could be Texas too. Yeah, right. So we could, we have some large states with large data outliers. But today, if I was a brand new client of yours and I was a lead buyer, and I had consistent process, and I was like, what I would always say, is one of our dream clients, right? Yeah. What's your advice? Buy auto leads, buy home leads, buy both,
Depends what state you're in. But I mean, for a majority of the states out there, you should buy. I would always skew higher to homes because I think it's a better client, better retention. You have an opportunity to get 2 cars and hopefully a toy along in there. So it's just a much better client all around for your agency. So I would skew higher there, but there's good work and good volume with those auto leads. And I think we found that. And there's some various filters, a homeowner filter, potentially, stuff that help you, multi-car filter, right? All those types of things that will help you skew away from that monoline, single auto vehicle those people come and they go in your agency just as fast as they can fill out a web form online.
So you're saying buy both, generally, skew a little higher towards homeowners. Now, in certain states, we talk about minimums that buyers are buying. We've seen, I call it my point of demarcation, right? I really think it's 25 leads a day. I see at 25 leads a day, people are really doing well. And if they're below, it's not that they're not doing well. It's just, we don't get to a statistically significant sample size to really determine, are they doing well or not? What's your position on, certainly no one should buy more than they can handle.
Yeah.
I agree. But what do you think kind of, if someone says, hey, listen, I've got 3 dedicated salespeople, that's all they do all day, sell, they do no service work. How many leads per day would you expect per producer for someone to buy? That's a question I get all the time. I have no idea what the answer is.
100%. My first response back would be what type of CRM are you in? Or do you have a dialer? So if you don't have a dialer, that number is 7 to 10.
Okay.
7 to 10 because... And you just back into the numbers the dials that we want to see. So if you don't have a dialer, you're going to ask somebody, you give them 10 leads, you wanted to see them do a minimum of 100 outbound dials on those leads alone, not follow-ups or anything like that. And so then you start to take a look at that, and that's about 150 dials a day.
Okay.
125, somewhere in that ballpark to basically complete an entire sales day for them. And I think that's a good mix of calling the new stuff, calling the old stuff, and closing what you got, right? But if you have a dialer, that number can get up to 15. So I could say if you had a dialer and you're in a platform like Ricochet, you should be probably at 45.
Okay.
Calls. So that's the variance. So with those 3 people, could either be down at the low end 21 all the way up to 45. And so, we've had that conversation, and I keep on telling you need to raise your minimums just because what I think we've seen the most is probably you have high volume publishers, right? That have they perform. But I think a lot of people that take 10 to 15 a day, they get filled with that. Most of that stuff. And that's kind of they have lower quote percentage and a close percentage. And so we're filling up on that. And then they're not getting to some of the other sources throughout the day.
And I think that's exactly, it's like, and we, I think we're different because we let our clients really control their blend if they want to. And I think we've started doing some good work with some of our mutual clients on that and eliminating sources and sub-sources that are really poor performing. I'm all about getting, I call them the scumbag publishers. They know who they are generally, right? I'm all about getting the scumbag publishers out of this because right, for two reasons, right? There's no reason for insurance agents to waste their money on people who don't want to talk to them, right? Yeah. And, right, it's a horrible consumer experience. Why are we harassing people that don't want to be sold a product? And there are I've done short form videos on this where it's like Candy Crush leads. Literally, I talked to somebody one day, I'm listening to, and this was in an Allstate office I was consulting for at the time, literally listening to this phone call, just going so horrible. And I'm like, I just took the phone. I'm like, we're not going to sell this first. Let me just talk to them and see what
they were doing.
What are they doing? Why are we on the phone with you? You don't want to buy anything. That's evident. How did you get to us? And they were literally I ran out of Candy Crush lives and I filled out this form to get a couple Candy Crush lives. And that's crazy to me. But it made sense. I'm like, well, no wonder you're so disengaged. You have no reason to talk to us. You're now re-upped on Candy Crush lives and you've probably got us on speakerphone and you're sitting there playing Candy Crush. It's insane. But there are publishers like that out there. And obviously the performance is going to be horrible. Yeah. And so we can cut that out to get rid of it. And conversely, I was so naive when I started getting into lead gen. I thought every lead started with someone on Google searching for insurance, right? And I'm like, how else would they get there? I don't know. But we have email marketed leads, we have TikTok leads, Instagram leads, Facebook leads, and the consumer intent is, in my mind, the biggest factor of will there be good lead quality? Yeah. Will this convert? How intentful of a consumer is this? But also if someone sees an Instagram ad, and I always tell people, I'm like, sometimes I'll see an Instagram ad for some really high-end sneakers and I'll be like, this is interesting. I might click it. Doesn't mean I'm going to buy it today. So I think a lot of agents aren't actually using the leads to their full potential, not targeting them on social media, not staying in front of them in an organic way. And I think there's ways to do that. Do any of your clients do that today, or what's their requote process, their follow-up process?
That's the process. That's the step that I think we all miss. We were just so worried on getting that new. We have all this data in the back end, right? And how do you attack that? And what do you do? A lot of the agents are tied by what their captive, agencies will allow or the mothership will allow them to do. I think being strategic about it, and I have a couple offices that go about it this way where we take a look at the current zip codes that we're closing the best in, right? And then you take those zip codes and then you go into your database of old leads and you pull up those zip codes and you start there, right? Just start where we're competitive now. That gives us the best shot. And do a couple calls and do a couple of emails and see how it goes, right? But you got to have that process in place, which requires manpower, right? And to our point, so if we can get the front end quality better, then we'll have time to get back in there. But I completely get that it is hard to get to that old stuff just because it takes just more manpower to do.
So shifting gears here, we were both at the Allstate Mega Conference a little while ago, and you were on stage with Jamie Pickles from First Interpreter. And, I passed the First Interpreter data to our mutual clients, and you put it on a beautiful dashboard for us to see. And we've seen Allstate agents close. So for those of you who don't know, right, the first interpreter score scores the carrier's competitive position. And the competitive position is a 1 through 4 score, where 4 is the most competitive. Now, Jay, we've seen that with State Farm. All-state agents are closing State Farm 4s in certain states, not in every state, but in certain states, like I think in Florida, for instance, I don't think we even buy State Farm 1s for our clients there anymore. We eliminate those on the front end. So I think it's a huge advantage of like doing business with us, is we can do like cool things like that our competitors just don't do or can't do, or won't or can't. I'm not sure which, but what do you think of that data point today as it exists? I mean, it seems to me like it's a beautiful upward curve, and it's really nice. Would you advise clients in certain states to not buy those State Farm ones if they're not performing, or buy them lower?
I think we're getting to enough data to start to make decisions at the beginning of the year, I think, on that. It's a weird to see that those charts fill in. That's been interesting over the last 6 months, because I feel like we saw different things in the beginning, and then as we've gotten more and more data, it's become clear that all state agents are competitive where State Farm's competitive, which is, hey, that's a great sign, right? I mean, like if State Farm's competitive in an area and it's showing that we're competitive and we're winning those deals, that's great for all state agents. I think moving forward, we will be. And I've always said this is like, I'm looking. It's great that we have that data on the auto, but I want it on the homes, because I think and that just gets into the nuts and bolts about how First Interpreter works, right? And just what the data is coming through to you to be able to score it through First Interpreter. So when someone's on the web, they're just filling out usually their information, and they're probably not going to fill out the second car and the second driver. And so we've talked about that, where we're probably not getting the best accurate picture of that client when we're running it through First Interpreter. But I think on a home lead, I think and you provide those services where you're talking about verified square footage and dwelling coverage and stories, and I think a construction year and stuff like that. We should be able to verify that data, then run it through First Interpreter, and then give you a great score. I just think there's less unknowns in that. And so I'm excited about that moving forward. But I think moving forward, we'll be making those decisions. And that could be what's nice about your service is that's why the agent can make that decision. So if we can take a look at it in your state, say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Do you want to go after it this way? If you think, let's try it out. We can try it out on an A sample and a B sample. So, and just see which one performs well.
This is something we haven't even talked about yet, but one data point that we're going to start passing you is like total number of automobiles filled out. Like we can see it today on the form, like is there vehicle 1, is there vehicle 2, but we have now a new data point that is number of vehicles. And I think that there's going to be a correlation, right? The more vehicles that someone fills out, maybe more intent, right? More intentful consumer. And, also, right, as would I rather pay $10 for a 4-car household or for a 1-car household? Of course, I want the 4-car household, right? There's a better return on my marketing dollar there. So I think that's an interesting data point that we'll, start to measure soon. But what other data points, are the biggest ones you look at with, your clients today?
Obviously, we look at zip code. That's like numero uno. When a lead comes in, where is it coming in from and where are we closing it, right? Insurance companies, look, they rate their policies on zip code. So it's the easiest thing to look at. And it's just not knowing about what zip codes you're selling in. And that's where I think I get hung up with a lot of agents. Because we don't know how many leads that we bought in that zip code either. If you're just looking at your sales and where you're selling, there's a lot that goes on there. You're obviously going to sell more around your agency, right? But that might not be the most competitive. It's just the most intent customers coming to you in that zip code because you live in that zip code. And so that's where I go around about it a couple of different ways with my agents. But zip code, we got to track how many leads that we're buying, the conversion rate per zip code, and how much we're spending in each zip code. We also look at the density and what we're looking at a lot in the Southeast when we get out of the rural or urban areas in the Southeast, their home selection rate or approval rate really goes down out of the rural areas. And I've had this conversation with multiple different agents over the last 2 weeks. And so we're really getting into those zip code demographics and looking at density, median age, population, just so that we can make smarter purchasing decisions in urban areas rather than the rural areas. And that's just kind of like, let's just go where we can write more. And so then when we're looking at the RMPs, if it doesn't fit, just don't buy there. And we can do that. But that's goes along with technology and getting the right pieces in place. And I'm always constantly doing that. My database didn't have that, right? And so I went out and got zip codes with demographics and let's start looking at it and like really incorporating that. But you pass a lot of information along. And that's the thing that I wish we had more in the industry, because you said like whether they are doing it or not, I guarantee you they're doing it and they have the information.
They definitely do.
They just don't want to pass it along. And that's unfortunate. And that's the reason why I like using your services. And that's why I tell my agents, like, look, there's and I've got pillars now. We got to have a ledger balance, right? Of the leads that you sell and how much we paid for the lead.
Yeah.
And
some vendors don't have that.
Yeah, 100% they don't have that.
Just crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
I don't know how we spend money with these guys when they're not providing us what they sold us, right? And so that's numero uno one. And we got to have a website. I like that. I don't want Google Sheets or spreadsheets being passed around. Like, we got to have a website. If the lead provider isn't investing in technology, then what are we doing? Then we should cut them out of the process. We should go directly to the source that they're going to. And then we just really have to have a consistent open communication, right?
Yeah.
And so those are the three things. Like, if you can't provide support, a website, and a ledger balance about what we bought, then
you're not really a lead vendor.
Yeah, exactly. You're just a cog in the wheel there. And we want to deal directly with people that add value. And I think that's where we'll see the industry change a lot, I think, too. As we move away, and probably a lot of the fat goes away after the billions of dollars that have been pumped through come back maybe a half of what it was, maybe a quarter. I don't know, but it's going to be a leaner and better industry.
It will. And I think, my position's always been with the FCC changes that it's not really going to solve like the robocall crisis or the unwanted call crisis in this country, but it's going to lead to a better insurance agent experience. It's going to lead to a better consumer experience for certain. Maybe not as much as the government is hoping it is, but that's okay. I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's a mindset shift, right? I think a lot of the clients we work with understand value versus price. And I think that's like hugely important. An analogy that I always, and I'm really going to I'm saying this because I'm trying to drive some of my competitors to be more transparent. It's one of the biggest benefits I have in this business right now is like, I'm crazy enough to be like openly transparent when no one else is. I don't want it to stay that way. I want everyone to get more transparent in this because, as I've told you a million times, I don't want to work with every insurance agent. I want to work with like the very best insurance agents and provide them value. I don't want to be the next, whatever giant company is today. If everyone were to be more transparent and we could get insurance agents to focus on value versus cost, I think that it really solves a lot of the marketing dilemmas that we have today and probably makes the system better, right?
100%. But we got to know where the value is. And there's only a limited amount of volume in every state. Yeah. And I have this conversation with agents. It's just like, look, we just can't make up volume. Yeah. Right. And like the industry's really good at that right now. Yeah. And they're making up volume. So we got to be aware of that. And if you're in a state that's small, don't expect 2,000 leads a day.
It's like virtually impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so you got to be realistic. And I'll divert here too. And that's the expectations that you've got to have going into the lead game. And it's just, we got to be realistic with the expectations. We just said that we've been chewing away at 1.5% to 2% close rates. That means there's 98 junk leads in there.
Yeah.
And as one of my favorite agents says, all leads suck.
Yeah.
And it's 70% sales, 30% leads, right? So it's just a matter of what we are, because that's the way the industry is right now. And I think we'll get back to it to where we were years ago, where, there are 10% close rate data leads out there.
Yeah.
There is, right? But right now, yes, people are going to fill out the form multiple different times. Mm-hmm. Then the the publishers are going to sell it multiple different times. So yes, you are going to buy duplicate leads. Mm-hmm. You are going to have people that are so fed up with phone calls, hang up. Mm-hmm. They're going to say that, and they're going to say, "Hey, I never requested a quote." Just say it with your leads. Yeah. It's not a silver bullet. It's just you're doing some things and looking at different data points, like time on form, how many times it's been viewed, right? Mm-hmm. Which I've been doing a little bit of work on, like the number of times that email address pops up.
Yep.
And so, but it's crazy. Those numbers aren't really that correlated with the close percentages. Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at it, you're like, those are all intent stuff. And it's just like poor and excellent credit. I mean, we sell a lot of poor credit stuff. Yeah. Right. But it's just looking at those data points and just making sure that we know what we're buying, and then the market from there. So expanding down, be like, okay, this is what we're good at. We're going to look at these metrics, but then we got to be realistic about the volume that we're going to be able to get from this.
So what's your philosophy on how soon should we start to make changes in a campaign? How soon should we shut off a publisher or subsource? And I know, like, I don't have the perfect answer in my head at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it depends on your quote to close percentage. Okay. I don't think I've turned off based on the number of leads that we've received in from a publisher on an agent. But once we get to 10 quotes, and if we know that our disposition rates are good on our leads, and we know those were 10 actual quotes that occurred, I think that's enough. If you're closing at a 20% quote to close rate, well, we've seen, if we close one more, we're down at 10. That's not what we want. Yeah. I think once we get to that point, and obviously though, if we've taken 100 leads and we haven't quoted jack from it, then we should cut that one out too. But I really look at quotes, and really when we get up to 10, we should really start thinking about removing that source just so that it's not filling up the cap. Exactly. And then you can spend that money on somewhere else and go through there. Because every single campaign name that I'm showing for you is a publisher. And I tell my people, it's just like, look at them as individual lead providers. And so you have 50 different lead providers all sitting available for us to buy. And we just look at it that way. And so we're just going to either upbid or downbid the ones that we want and we don't want.
We do that consistently across, clients today. And when I look at the data, I look at, really the cost per sale of that particular campaign to see, is this one performing well? Could it perform better? Should we pay less for this? But one thing, a data point that I always look at is time of day the lead comes in, day of the week lead comes in. And I always tell my clients, I'm like, listen, I force you to buy 24/7, 365 because my competitors do it to you anyways. They just lie to you, right? And so you showed me something once when we were on a call with a mutual client, right? And it was like, all right, just look at like Monday and Tuesday at like 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, right? Like the percentage of volume that came in from all the vendors that you're monitoring was like extraordinarily high. Yeah. And so when we look at, date and time of lead, I think like midnight is within our top 10. Yeah. It is. Within our top 10,
Yeah. So
no one's calling them at midnight.
No one's calling them. You're buying them anyway, right? And I always do it. Anybody that does a demo, that's on my my demo, because I flip it and I say, hey, and we sort it by the number of leads that we bought. And 8, 9, 10, and 11, we buy 70% of our leads. Yeah. And it's not because people just quit shopping for insurance. Well, we hit our caps and we're not buying leads anymore. And the insurance companies have all this stuff coming in and we're just not buying it. But then I take that same table and we sort it by close percentage. And the top close percentages are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, like you can go down. I think the first top 10 close percentages in the day on an hourly basis is not 8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay. But now, and I preface all this, there's volume at 8, 9, 10, and 11, and there's a lot of sales there. So you can't not buy them.
Sure.
But you definitely don't want to fill your cap up during the most competitive times on the diluted product.
Yeah.
Capture some of that product. And we've added in the lead price to your date and time reports so that the agents can actually take a look and be like, okay, I'm buying the leads, but you know what? I'm not buying them at top dollar.
Exactly.
Right? You're buying them at a cheaper dollar amount, which helps offset that cost per sale.
Yep.
And I'll say this, whether you're buying them at Lead Clinic or not, like most reputable lead companies are going to sell the lead once up to 3 times, right? And so if you're that person that's buying that lead at 7 o'clock at night and there's nobody else buying it, you're supposed to be the only person that have bought that lead. Now, I don't know if that lead goes back out in the morning as well, if they didn't sell enough times, but they say that they don't. Yeah. So if you want to, turn on some after-hour campaigns and lower the price, that's my philosophy.
It makes complete sense, right? Because we're focused on the return on marketing, dollars spent, not on, anything else.
I also look at it too, like we're looking for quality customers. And I hate to say it, but like, I kind of want a person that has a job. Yeah. And can't talk insurance for an hour because I want to stay on the phone with the person for as long as possible. Yeah. So most of the people that we want and that is probably in our target demographic, well, probably both husband and wife work. Yeah. And they can't talk insurance. Yeah. And I've gone on that, and we've talked about the customer experience a lot. Well, the customer wants the quote when they want the quote, not when we want to give them the quote, right? And so that's why if you're in competition with a direct carrier, and most all companies are direct carriers now, and so, either captive agents, your number one competitor is probably the carrier you're working for, because you're going head to head with them. That's the reason why they have call centers and people on staff pretty much all day, right?
Every day. Yeah.
Every day, someone's there to sell you a policy because the customer wants the policy when they want the policy, not when we want to give it to them, right? And so I talk to a lot of agents, and I think we have a mutual agent that's like bought into that, and they're open all the time now, and they're absolutely crushing it. And the cost per sale is less on the weekends. Their employees are actually loving it because they're more effective for a couple hours on the weekend, and then they take off a couple hours during the week. Yeah. And so it's job flexibility. I think
weekday time off is probably more valuable to the employee than the weekend time off, right? You need to go to the doctor. You need to go to the dentist. You need to go to, I don't know, something for your kid's school or something, right? That weekday time is going to be more valuable to that employee. So are a lot of your clients working weekends after hours or not
Only
enough?
A handful, not enough, right? And I go back to it is like, if we're not meeting the customer how they want to be met, right? Whether that is presenting the quote in the way that they want to be presented to, and then we're missing the mark. And when they want to talk about the quote, and so we've got to be available. And I think that's retail agencies. Like, look, part of the reason that a lot of us had become P&C agents was the flexibility, right? And you're a small business owner, you can kind of come and go. You got to work these kind of core hours, and if you don't want to, you don't have to do anything else. Well, customers want you, right? And they want you later at night, and they want you on the weekends.
Well, and it kind of works well too. I mean, if you have, with the remote work environment today, if you're at least in Eastern time zone, right, and you hire some folks in Mountain or Pacific time zone, you can pick up later hours.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's where I just think that's where the industry is, right? And you talk about, social media ads and everything like that. I always make the comparison for my agents is like, it's like you've been in a mall lately and you're walking down the middle of the mall and you're just attacked by kiosk people about cleaning white shoes and stuff like that, right? Yep. That's social media ads, right? Yeah. You're just like, get out of my way, right? And you're just wanting to get to the store that you want to get to. So when people type in, home insurance quote or auto insurance quote, and they see all this other stuff fall around them for a week. That's your kiosk right there.
It's interesting too, because I don't see enough of this, and I'm pretty dialed into advertising, but the most persuasive ads in my mind today are the ads I don't even realize are ads until I'm halfway through them, right? Yeah. And so I think when people talk about influencer advertising, they generally think of like attractive young females as influencers, but I would suggest there's this whole other world of influencers too, right? You look at like the Points guy, right? Yeah. Who's probably the very first like influencer in credit card marketing. I mean, this guy made a fortune and then sold the company to, I forget who it was, but a giant company. But there are influencers. I was telling someone, they're like mommy influencers, right? Who tell you about everything, about kids and babies and stuff like that. There are all these different influencers that people are watching, and some of them are very loyal to have a tremendously loyal following. I've really seen insurance, and a lot of this is because it's carrier driven, right? A lot of the lead gen ecosystems driven by Progressive, as we both know. Most people don't realize this, but I don't see a lot of influencer marketing. I think that some of it could be pretty good. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I don't play in that space a lot, and I'm pretty much off social media. I try to do a little LinkedIn and stuff like that, but it's all kind of that market is just amazing to me. But that's a great space for agents to connect with their customers, and like I always think. I've worked since the beginning. I've worked with an agency down in San Diego, and they have a I call him a kid, but he's probably 26 or 27, and I think he has like 10 or 15,000 followers, right, on Instagram. And then he just started posting like his 5-star reviews, and all of a sudden he starts writing like $30,000 a month. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm just taking like my 5-star reviews, and then I'm talking about it, and then I'm talking about this, or I'm talking about that. Crazy powerful, and something that our agents just don't take advantage of, right? And I was thinking about this on the way up. I don't know much about social media advertising and what it would promoting your links and your post and stuff like that. And so a year ago, I was getting a website built out, and so I went to a company and they built out the website, and then they said, hey, we'll do, social media for you, Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, sweet. Cause I can't do that. I don't know, Yeah. And so they posted like some stock photos and just like a little line and stuff like that. But like, I just couldn't believe, digital marketers, they took 50% of everything that I wanted to spend on advertising. I was like, holy smokes. Yeah. And so I can see why it would be, it's a scary proposition because it's just like buying leads, right? And you're just promoting posts, right? It's like, it's nuts.
Well, I think a lot of too, like what you're saying about the person posting the 5-star reviews, like you can do a lot of that organically without spending any money. You just have to make engaging content. And I think that's the trick, right? Is you've got to get the content to be engaging. And insurance is not sexy. Insurance is not interesting. So it's hard to do.
But everybody needs it.
Everyone needs it. So, I don't know. I would encourage more folks and agencies to be doing stuff like that because you're going to start with a very small following. I mean, look, I had a podcast about insurance before I had this podcast. I'm not sure anyone ever watched one episode. Who knows? But it was something fun to do, right? Now, as we launch this podcast, it's for a very small target audience, but we're getting a loyal following of that audience because it's information, right? Free content and free information is great. So, putting out information about insurance, like demystifying insurance, I think that you've got some young folks in your agency who are sitting there browsing TikTok and Instagram all day anyways. Might as well create a TikTok or Instagram, that could, could potentially bring in some interesting things. So I'm basically giving everyone advice on how not to buy leads and how to generate their own organically, but it's a good thing.
We touched on multiple points. So call through your old data leads and then do social media.
Yeah. Well, and as we talked about, call through your old data leads too. I think I'm going to touch on this again, but I did a podcast yesterday, which will probably be released before this one when we do with Eric Troutman from Troutman and Mean.
He's probably, don't do that.
Yeah. It's like we have to make sure they're not on the do not call list. We have to make sure all these things. And one thing that we touched on in that podcast yesterday that I think is like the most impactful thing is like someone tells you, go ahead and call me again next year, right? If they're on the do not call list, that's an illegal call, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal if you're an Allstate agent, a State Farm agent, or a Farmers agent where, the companies that you're working for really have vicarious liability and can be on the hook. And now, plaintiffs' attorneys' eyes go crazy, right? And they're seeing, hundreds of millions of dollars in potential settlement dollars. Yeah. You've got to be careful about that. You've got to be careful, but it doesn't mean you can't direct mail them. It doesn't mean you can't email them. There's a lot of things you do. It doesn't mean you can't target them on social media to see the engaging, TikTok or LinkedIn or Instagram reel. And I think LinkedIn, honestly, is an underutilized social media platform because the customers, the target customers that Allstate agents, State Farm agents, Farmers agents are looking for are on LinkedIn.
Heck yeah, they are.
Right?
Yeah.
An executive or a manager at some, whatever enterprise that's, they're the affluent side of middle America, and that's kind of the target, right? 3 cars, nice house, good credit, and hopefully a good driving record. It's like the perfect insurance client. Those folks are on LinkedIn, so I don't think, agencies are using that enough. But, to get back into one final point, I think that we both talk about client retention. I'm talking about our clients retaining our services. And I think we have a phenomenal retention rate among our clients, and I know you do as well. But there are some clients that won't see value in measuring this data over time. And I think they're short-sighted. What's your position about this?
I'm lucky enough to be in some of the top agents' offices across the country. I think they see my value, right? I look at it this way too. Some people see that I have an expensive service, right? But we're spending, $250,000 a year. And if you're not running the numbers and nobody else is running the numbers, I guarantee you I can make that $750 feel a lot less or that, $1,500 feel a lot less on a monthly basis and actually generate income when you're looking and making decisions on sound information, right? And that doesn't happen overnight, like I said. And I don't do any of the work. I just point out stuff, right? And that's all I do. When the data is organized correctly and you're seeing it correctly, that is powerful, and it's way more than...
You've saved your clients a lot of money.
100%.
Yeah.
And so, and they tell me I should charge more. So that's fine. And that's what's happened. And so with that, where do I see it going from there, right, is I've re-envisioned LeadSwami like 3 times. And I'm in that next one right now where, we might be even more expensive than where we are, but the services and the data and how you'll be able to transform your data and look at it and really dig into it is going to be phenomenal coming up, just because that is where the technology is. And just being a small business owner doesn't mean that we can't have access to the same tools that everybody else is using. It's just really expensive, right? It's just really expensive. Everything that you've done at Lead Clinic is really expensive, and that's what people don't get.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to invest in those types of things to stay ahead, I think you're just falling behind and it becomes harder and harder to function.
Exactly right. And I think that's probably the most important lesson, right? You've got to stay ahead of the curve. You have to understand where you've been to understand where you're going, right? And you have to follow the trends. And, I tell a lot of my clients this, right? Very early in my lead gen journey, I talked to the head lead buyer for Liberty Mutual Insurance, and he told me, Peter, the best advice I got in this industry was from my predecessor, who told me, have a short memory. Because what worked yesterday isn't going to work today. What works tomorrow is probably not working today. So you've got to be quick to adapt. And if you're not measuring the data, how can you actually adapt, right?
We have this conversation quite a bit, and we're like, wow, man, we really messed up 2 weeks ago, right? We made that change, and but then I always say, like, well, where would we have been if we weren't tracking this? So, right, we would have made the change, and that would have been 3 months before we were like, oh, that was pain. Like, then we missed 3 months, right? And we're making changes after 2 or 3 weeks and correcting ourselves. And so that's where it is, right? And it does change that fast.
But look, one of the best insurance carriers, in terms of being profitable year over year is Progressive, right? And I think Progressive's whole position of why they can do it better than everyone else in the industry is they're quick to pivot.
Yeah.
And I think that's any business, right? The quicker you are to pivot, the more profitable you're going to be generally because you're going to shut off what isn't working. And then look, if we have, like you said, we have this conversation all the time. Like, okay, well, now we got 2 or 3 more sales in here. The numbers look really good. Like, why did we shut that off 3 weeks ago? But at the time, with the data we had, right? And that's how I look back at any decision, bad or good, that I've made, was at that point in time with the information that I had, would I make that same decision again? Of course.
Yeah.
So, now we have new information. Now we have a new
data
decision.
matures, right? It leads mature, right? And then a couple of them came in close, but that could be just that one specific publisher.
Could be.
Just maybe not as an intent, or like, I didn't need insurance right now. So you just have to track it.
Yeah.
So
anything else you want to tell? What's your biggest takeaway? What's your number one thing that you're going to tell clients all the time, or the one thing you see that's the worst thing you see frequently?
Look,
give us a good tidbit.
I'll give you some quick ones really quick. Answer the phone, right? And you know that, and my agents will know that. Like, if I see deterioration in closed percentages, I look at unanswered calls, right? Especially if you're taking warm transfers, or in that fact data leads, are we doing the dials, right? It all rests with the phone. If you can control the phones in your office, you've got half of this down. And so if you're getting a bunch of warm transfers in, what's your answer? What's your answer rate? Is it 95, 96, or is it like 75? Because that's most offices that I work with.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be my big takeaway. And then in 2024 is just know your data, right? And be on top of it, and work on the processes that are driving results in your office.
Makes sense. Yeah. Someone who's watching wants to retain you and utilize your service. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You can just go to my website. I've got a contact form there. I usually send out a survey after that, just basically a little bit about your agency, and then we'll be in contact with you.
And that's LeadSwami.com, right?
LeadSwami.com, yeah.
All right. Awesome. Jay, thanks for joining us, and thanks for watching today. We appreciate you and the work you're doing to help our insurance agents be more successful and monitor their data. Thank you.
Thank you.